Justin. Honestly, none of this would have happened tonight without Justin, so we're really grateful to him. And I am very excited to be here in this moment where so many people are suddenly newly excited about municipal governance, to talk to two people who know a lot about both its potentials and its limitations. So I want to start off as somebody who is admittedly newly interested in like exactly how local government works. I want us to start with some basics. So Councilmember Nurse, could I ask you to just sort of give us the like general, like what does the city council do versus the mayor versus the sort of state assembly, just so that we all sort of lay this groundwork? I feel like it's always assumed, and I want us to sort of start from a place where we're all on sort of the same page.
Yes, so I can do that. Also, thank you, CUNY, and thanks for having me. And I love that you all are pumping out public interest lawyers. Please do not go to the private sector, stay public. We need you. So the city council, in New York City, we have a mayor-council form of government. Specifically, we have a strong mayor form of government, which essentially means the executive, the mayor, has a disproportionate amount of power to the council. We are two co-governing institutions. We have 51 city council members across the 5 boroughs, and we are the check on the mayor. So the mayor runs agencies, they put forth a budget, the council votes on and adopts a budget, the city budget. We negotiate our city budget. We have oversight powers, so we bring agencies to the council. We have investigative powers, so we can investigate agencies and individuals within agencies. We can subpoena agencies and individuals and communications within the city agencies. And we have the legislative power. We write laws, we pass laws, and we also have the powers of land use. So rezonings, the disposition of, or the giving away or sale of public land, and we have a bunch of other powers, but that's what you need to know for now for the bird's eye view, is that we are kind of like the Congress to the president at the local scale.
Awesome. And so Nathan, you're much more focused on the sort of fiscal, but I'm going to ask you to give us the same sort of like, give us the basics. The New York City budget. Everyone's talking about how big it is right now, but where does the money come from? Where is it going? How should we sort of like, what are the facts we need to know to sort of set the ground for this conversation?
Yeah, thanks, and very happy to be here. So this is a really, politically exciting moment, but also as someone who works in state and local finance, very unusually exciting moment where suddenly everyone wants to know about stuff that normally no one wants to hear about, like just how much money is being spent and what it's being spent on. But budget people like when everyone gets interested in that conversation, just because it's just pretty much everything that's actually going on in the government is what they're spending money on. And it's kind of helpful to frame it out in relation to the federal government, because like most of the big exciting policy questions that almost anyone, but especially progressives, have been focused on for a few generations are questions of federal policy, either because it's about regulating the national economy or matters of foreign policy, or because there's an interest in really big spending programs like healthcare reforms under Obamacare. But the sort of interesting thing about the federal government is that it's pretty easy to tell you what the federal government spends its really big budget on, because it's not that many things. This federal government spends around $7 trillion a year, and I think about $3 trillion of that is Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. There's about $1 billion or $1 trillion spent on the military, which is a lot, but it's often less than people think. Right now, about $1 trillion on debt service, and then a bunch of other little things. Point being that I think, especially on the left, there tend to be misconceptions about what governments in general spend money on. Sometimes you'll hear really otherwise informed people say something like the federal government spends half of its budget on the military. It's not true. It's important because if you believe in big, broad social programs, as I think many of us do and as I do, you also have to accept that those are expensive because you want to give 80 million some odd seniors enough money to not die every year. It adds up. The federal government does not spend a lot of money, however, on the sorts of government things that most people interact with day to day. That's what state and local governments do. So most of people's experience of government, practically and fiscally, comes from these unsexy sort of state and local things. Schools, sanitation, social services. Even if you don't need social services, you live in a city with a lot of people who need social services. And so when people start to get involved in local policy debates, they realize that even though the federal government has taken up a lot of the attention of the sort of elite policy community for many, many years, there are these hugely important issues at the state and local level that don't get that much attention. And you can mostly cash it out in budgetary terms because what states and especially cities do is so operational. The city's budget is about $115 billion. It's a lot of money, but that's what it takes to run a city. Around half of that is spent in the Department of Education and the Department of Social Services. So that's things like sort of local forms of welfare and housing vouchers, keeping people out of homelessness. And a lot of the education budget is paying teachers. In every mayoral debate, people fight over the education budget because it's easy to say that a $35 billion department has a bloated budget, it should be cut. But again, the reality is you want to educate 1 million kids, you have to pay a bunch of teachers, and it's expensive. And that's fine, that's how it ought to be, but that's just where we are. So that's sort of like the bones of the city government is that budgetary plan. And most of the money goes into those services that we interact with every day.
That is super helpful. So, Danny, turning back to you, so you spoke about the city council as a check on the mayor. And obviously, you came into office in 2021, and so you've been under a mayor who had probably very different priorities than you and I would be interested in. And yet, so we're on the cusp of somebody who probably has much more sort of alignment with you. What are you excited about in that sort of capacity, and what are your concerns?
Yes, it is true that I'm hoping, if everybody is saying what they are believing, that we will have someone who's aligned, I'm aligned with. I've spent the last 4 years yelling at our mayor and at City Hall, and we've been in really petty, exhausting battles over the budget, over where our education dollars go, where our money for parks workers or trash cans or assistance for people to not be evicted, or for lawyers for people who are being evicted, or lawyers for folks who are fighting in immigration court. For CUNY, one of our biggest battles, I'm the co-chair of the Progressive Caucus, one of the biggest battles we have is funding dollars for CUNY for programming. And so I'm excited to mostly turn the temperature down. It's exciting to have, first of all, it's exciting for the idea that someone who is committed to the left, the deep left, I won't say far left, but deep left, is able to achieve the role, to achieve the executive office, to win and by 1 million votes. I think that's really powerful and shows the strength of organizing for the last couple of decades and how sophisticated it's gotten and the recalibration that's happened. So I'm really excited about that. I am excited about some of the agenda items that they've put forward that the council actually has been leading on for quite a long time. Universal childcare is something that this council has really spent a lot of time on. We've advanced about 6 pieces of legislation to move that forward. We have an early childhood education working group that's been going on for a couple of years to work out the kinks within pre-K, 2K, 3K, 4K. And we've been fighting in the city budget to pay for the right types of seats for childcare. So you might be a parent who needs a fuller day of childcare, or you might be a parent who needs or a guardian who needs a half day of childcare, and you have to distribute those types of seats across the board. But the council we also have an agenda. We are a council of 51 people, 34 women. We've had a pretty robust agenda around housing, housing affordability, building more housing, and building more housing that people want to live in, can afford to live in, and can grow into. We've done environmental legislation. We've we fought for more investments in higher public education. We're fighting for right now paraprofessionals and people in classrooms that help teachers. So there's a ton of stuff that we have that's our own agenda that we've actually struggled to get across the finish line under the current administration. So there's obviously going to be a lot of overlap. But it'll be nice to have a collaborative spirit, which I'm hoping. I'm managing my expectations. I think we all should. There's big promises and there's a huge road that we have to walk to get there. But I'm really looking forward to collaborating and not being in a combative relationship with the administration, hopefully.
That is something I think we're all really looking forward to. So Nathan, turning back to you, I'm sort of going to ask a similar question about sort of like, we're on the cusp of this Warren administration. What are the big challenges that you see sort of on the horizon when it comes to the budget? And in particular, I feel like a lot of people want to know sort of like, if taxation is required for some of his major proposals, is his agenda really at the mercy of Albany?
Okay, so let's see. I'll do like a mini social scientific exercise here. Like I don't know, how many of you read local coverage of the budget and have seen an article in the past 2 or 3 days that's like, Mayor-elect Mamdani's facing down a $6 billion budget deficit? Raise your hands high so that I can see. This is all I think about I can't overstate how much of my time it takes up. Okay, that's about what I expected. So there are a few layers to this. One is that technically it's interesting, but politically the most boring thing that you do in fiscal policy is think about budget forecasting. But it's essentially impossible to overstate how important that is, because the city takes in tax revenue and then it spends it on those teacher salaries and cop salaries and repaving roads. But it doesn't, it has a pretty good idea of how much money is going to come in, but it all comes from all of us paying our taxes, property taxes, income taxes. I forgot to answer Corinne's question about where the money comes from. The city's tax base, it's about half property taxes and half other taxes. So that's like individual income taxes, corporate taxes, other business taxes, sales taxes. It's a lot bigger. It's bigger than any other urban budget in the United States. But it's very common for local budgets to rely on property taxes. But people are often delinquent in paying their property taxes. Point being that if you're in the budget office, regardless of how much you believe that we should really be paying for all this stuff and it's good, you are always worried that the taxes aren't going to come in. And so they have to forecast what those revenues are going to be so that they can say to the mayor and to the council, here's how much money we expect to have, and that's how much money you guys can go spend on stuff. That's a very delicate process because it's all a function of the economy, right? If people lose their jobs, they don't pay taxes. If Wall Street has a great year, they pay a lot more in taxes and you end up with extra money, and then people want to spend it all. I say, people want to spend money regardless of their political position. Progressives want to spend it on stuff that I like. Republicans want to spend it on business subsidies. So every legislator is always trying to spend a bunch of money. And it's just a question of how much you have and how to put it towards good ends. But the point is that this is actually the frame in which all fiscal politics take place. And then they essentially end up litigating those forecasts. And the side that kind of gets the dominant claim in the press is this sort of bearish outlook of the budgeting offices. And honestly, and we've been very publicly critical of this, but Eric Adams's Office of the Budget has been pretty aggressive in understating how much tax revenue they're going to get every year. So they always go into the budget negotiations saying, we're looking at huge deficits, it's a crisis, we gotta cut everything. And then those are just forecasts, so eventually reality catches up to you and they say, well, actually taxes are a lot better than we said they were gonna be. And so that means they don't end up really slashing stuff, but it makes it very, very hard to have a rational budget conversation because you've been leading with this line that it's like a fiscal crisis around the corner, and then at the last minute you say, well, actually we're gonna be okay. But that means there's not any room to really have a rational discussion about the fact that there are trade-offs, but there's also more money than they said there was gonna be. So one thing we hope to see in the next mayoral administration is some of that weirdness and sort of unnecessary antagonism going away. But there are still some real challenges. Before we even get to his agenda, there's a lot of money being spent on housing vouchers. There's a plan to bring down class sizes. Those are both good priorities, I think, but it's going to be hard to fit them into the budget. There's a lot of money spent on police overtime, like $1 billion, which is real money in a city budget. They're going to have to find a way to bring that down. And so before you even get to his agenda, he's going to be in the same position every mayor is in, which is dealing with the real internal pressures in the budget, finding a way to handle them that's consistent with his values and in collaboration with the council, but not doing it in a way that breaks the basic logic of budgeting. So I actually think that's going to put a lot more pressure on him than his proactive agenda. I think what we're likely to see something good on childcare. They'll fight it out, but even though Kathy Hochul is not a raise taxes governor, she does want to have a childcare legacy. There's a lot of consensus actually on it. Politically, everyone sort of agrees that childcare is too expensive. So we're likely to see some sort of little revenue measure and some kind of childcare plan. I think where I'll be saying a lot is there's like a dumb way to do that and a smart way to do it. And the smart way to do it is with a pretty full-throated financing mechanism that actually funds a robust childcare program. And it's easy to do it in a dumb way where you have like a fake financing mechanism and you say, hey, we're paying for childcare, but the system doesn't really work. So I think that the politics will be supportive of doing something on childcare, but there will be a real fiscal challenge of negotiating their way to a deal that actually funds something that people like.
So one thing about the budget that I feel like a lot of people are focused on right now is what's going on with the federal government, right? So like there are all of these threats. There's some that have already taken place. There are always more threats on the horizon, particularly with Mamdani going into office. And so how do we think about, as New Yorkers, sort of like what can be done to protect sort of like through the budget? Like, are there other ways to pay for things if we end up with these giant deficits? But also politically, what should we be doing to try to like make sure that New Yorkers don't bear the brunt of what Trump is doing?
You want to talk about razors?
So yeah, there's one thing that I feel like I end up saying all the time is just cities, cities require more money, more funding to exist at all, right? You can't have a city without the subway, you can't have a city with really robust internal infrastructure. You actually can't have a city without the social infrastructure to make sure that people aren't, or at least that you're trying to reduce the number of people who are homeless and facing hunger and deep economic insecurity. So it just takes more tax revenue generally to have a city, and then it promotes economic growth and people do better, but also people just want to live in a city. And so that's actually sort of the basic principle in recognizing that the city has found ways to pay for stuff over time. But it might, I always say that the left has to get used to the idea that it's okay for everyone to pay taxes. So Bloomberg raised property taxes. The city has found ways to finance, actually it's water service through fees. So you pay a separate water fee. It doesn't come out of tax revenue, but there's sort of a continuum or not a clear line between a tax and a fee in many cases. The city's tax base has grown over time, just as the city has grown economically since the 90s. It's seen significant increases in its tax revenue. So it has found ways to generate the money to pay for stuff. And it may be the case in the face of federal funding cuts and who knows what the Trump economy will do, that there are essentially non-tax the rich options that have to be considered. And that would be the right move, right? Better to do that and broadly raise taxes than to start really hurting city service provision. But I think it will require a political narrative that says this is consistent with being a progressive or a left-wing mayor, that you sort of maintain the integrity of our public provision, and it's okay for everyone to pay into that. That's a little bit different than, I think it makes sense that Mamdani has led with Tax the Rich, but that is not always the story you hear out of progressive politics.
I'll just add some context in terms of the process of making the decisions about priorities. I think I'm looking forward to being crafted better. So, for example, as you were laying out, the forecasting, they were under forecasting how much revenue we would get. Our institution, the council has our own finance experts and economists and people. We do our own forecasting. The Office of Management and Budget, they do their own forecasting, and then we have a couple of different independent entities that support the kind of reconciling the difference between the two of us. So we have our own independent analysis, they have an analysis, and their analysis has been for the last 4 years, we're walking off a cliff and we've got to cut. And instead of having a conversation and really looking at instead of taking a scalpel, something like a sharp knife and looking at laser focused cuts on what's not working, what has not produced the outcomes that we had hoped to do, how are we constantly evaluating. There were just kind of broad cuts across the board with just general explanations. And that has been very frustrating because there are city programs that we don't need or that aren't working, and they're not the best bang for our buck. And we should identify those and we should cut them. The challenge is we were not dealing with a mayor or an OMB director, I would say, that was interested in anything we had to say or respected our institution, and so it was a fight. And unfortunately, in the type of governing system we have, where we have a strong mayor, mayors can start initiatives, they can launch programs, their agencies can cut programs, and we don't necessarily have the power to stop that. So we would see mid-year, in the middle of the fiscal year, which is stupidly July to July. I just hate it. June 30th, July 1st. I'm can we just all be on the same schedules? Mid-year.
I am not the one who's telling people
when
the fiscal year ends.
Oh yeah.
Thank you for.
Yeah, I'll take that one. But we'll have, for example, the Department of Corrections. I had oversight over the Department of Corrections through my committee. We have a lot of programs and we fund a lot of organizations as a city to go into the jails, make relationships with people in our city jails to support them coming out of those jails when their time is done, and to re-enter communities and be set up for success, right? To have all the things they need to not get in trouble again, and have housing, get a job, or get into family therapy or whatever it is you need. And in the middle of the year, they just decided we're cutting all these programs and this is saving us $17 million. And that is not, that's not the best use of a cut, right? For us, we were we need those programs. Why? Because we don't want people on the street doing crimes or criming, right? We don't want that. But this is the type of process that we're dealing with, where you have a strong mayor saying we're cutting it and we don't have recourse. And so just to say that there are the process of identifying as a city and as co-governing institutions, what are the priorities that we're agreeing are important with the resources we have, with the projections that we have. I am really, really hoping that process is collaborative, is genuine, is thoughtful, and has the right timing and cadence to prevent disruption in funding and resources to a lot of like nonprofits and organizations that many New Yorkers rely on for the delivery of social services that we contract out. So, yeah.
So switching gears slightly, so our last event was on sort of how New York got so unequal in the first place, right? And so we ended up talking, as you guys are probably wouldn't be surprised to find out, about the 1970s sort of fiscal crisis, right? So I'm interested in the ways in which you see the effects of that, both materially and ideologically, in sort of your own sort of experience about thinking about either the budget or about dealing with the real concrete effects in your own district, about sort of like how do we see these things play out, and then sort of what can we do, how do we see them continue to impact the present, and how do we get out of that cycle?
Unless you want to go, I was going to ask you to restate the question again in a little bit simpler form.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, I just think that we talked a lot about sort of like the systematic abandonment under the fiscal crisis, that sort of the fiscal crisis was used as this sort of opportunity where there was sort of systematic abandonment by the city, and how we're still seeing the effects of that on sort of like, we talked about the sort of like, are there concrete effects, the ways that we see it still in the inequalities in the city as it exists today? But then also on an ideological level, how is it being used in these sort of conversations about budgeting?
I mean, I'll just say I represent East New York and Brownsville and Bushwick and City Line. These are neighborhoods that have been left behind. It's just, I mean, I don't want to repeat the same story that everyone hears about certain parts of New York City, but we have a situation where we have mostly minority communities in parts of New York. They're house rich, cash poor, stagnant wages. Maybe they are segregated neighborhoods. They have low investment in infrastructure. They have high property taxes in relationship to other parts of the area, in relationship to their income levels, and they have, like, not as nice parks and not as nice schools and not as nice a bunch of things that are public goods that are delivered in other parts of New York City. And so when it comes down to an austerity mindset or the idea of a fiscal cliff coming, that we have to tighten up, it often is a district like mine or my neighboring districts where we are literally just fighting it out for scraps, fighting for a new middle school because we don't have any seats, or fighting for programs that other neighborhoods have that we don't have that are publicly funded, fighting for a more after school, or we don't have PTAs that can raise a shit ton of money the way other neighborhoods do. And so like we are scrapping it out, and when a mayor is just saying we've got to cut, when it comes to the social services programs that are on the block, they're on the chopping block, it's us. It's my type of district, and that mindset I think permeates our institutions. I think there's an opportunity to reframe what it means to deliver public goods and really take care of everybody, and kind of shift that. But I think that we are a long way from fully repairing everything that's been done over those particular moments, from the past that are still, harming our communities today.
So in a way, sort of taking the opposite side of the issue, there are no doubt long-lasting material effects of the 70s, and there are some lingering governance consequences, like the city has to run its financials under GAAP accounting principles, and that's very unusual. But the basic narrative is one that has stuck around for a long time in a way that's, I'd say, really inapplicable. Because the economic and fiscal reality of the fiscal crisis was, you had a lot of flight to the suburbs of the sort of higher earning population, and so that was bad for the city's tax base. The city really was borrowing a lot of money to pay short-term expenses, and so it was literally spending more money than it was taking in tax revenues. The memory of the fiscal crisis makes it very easy now for say, sort of fiscally conservative policy advocates and politicians, and even, as the council member was saying, sort of the mayor when he wants to cut the budget, to suggest that there's always, that we're like 10 hours away from another fiscal crisis, and if we don't just start whacking things in the city government, it's all gonna go to hell. And that's just false. Like, it's so concretely false, right? The city pretty much runs annual surpluses, has a very strong tax base. There are still a lot of rich people, despite all the shit about how they're leaving. Like, they keep on producing more rich people, and they keep on getting richer, and they pay a lot of taxes, and the city can cover its expenses. And there's also a really large category of sort of like sub-rich people. I mean, people in New York City are so rich that rich now, it's really weird. Rich sort of means like you make over $1 million a year. I mean, that's crazy, right? There are a lot of very rich people who make like hundreds of thousands of dollars a year and live well and accumulate wealth, but they're not like in the 1%. And then that somehow translates into state legislative debates where like you can't even talk about raising taxes on the poor lumpen single-digit millionaires. It's only the people who make like $10 million a year who are really... So somehow the whole frame has gotten really distorted. But it's not just that there's a rich 1%, it's that there are a lot of high-earning professionals who make, say, between 100 and $100,000 and $1 million a year. And that's another very big part of the tax base. And many of them own homes and they pay a lot of property taxes. So the real fiscal policy dilemma isn't, do we have another fiscal crisis where you have to fire a bunch of public sector workers and everything goes to hell? It's, do we have to make little cuts? Do we have to raise taxes a little bit? It's like these marginal decisions, but they're always sort of characterized as this impending crisis. And you heard a lot of that rhetoric from Eric Adams over the past few years, where every time he would do a budget, he would say, oh, they're gonna, like the plane's gonna crash, and well, and we have to save everybody, and that means like across the board 2% agency spending reductions, which it just doesn't even really make sense when you think about it. But that narrative has been so locked in, and it's the sort of go-to reference point for budget discussions, and it's wrong. And again, it doesn't mean that there are no trade-offs, right? There are always hard decisions to make. There's never enough money. Even if you raise taxes, but that doesn't mean that you have to always approach it in this kind of hysterical way that is just inaccurate.
So turning to policies that you all have both sort of advocated for. Councilmember Nurse, so you're the sponsor of COPA, a bill designed to give nonprofits, including community land trusts, the first opportunity to purchase multifamily buildings when they go up for sale. Can you tell us a little bit about the bill and if there are other sort of legislative opportunities like this to create solutions for the affordable housing crisis in the next 4 years that you're excited about?
Yes, happy to talk about COPA, and it's a piece of legislation that is going to destroy all of New York City, according to the real estate industry. So get ready. We're fleeing and we're like leaving with the millionaires. Like the whole place is going under. So this is a piece of legislation that's been around for a while. I'm the newest lead sponsor. It was originally Councilmember Rivera's, and it might have been someone else's before. But the idea is that, and this is modeled off of a program in San Francisco that's up and running, for certain types of properties, not every single property, but for certain types of properties, they would create a program where if someone wants to sell, they have to communicate an intent to sell, or if they've gotten an offer, they communicate they're gonna sell. And then a list of qualified buyers, who are generally nonprofit affordable housing developers, would get like a set aside time to match that offer and put in a good faith offer. And if they have to go through a process of like getting some financing. It's like a real offer. They can't just like be like, yeah, we're interested. Like you have to like put some stuff down. And we're also creating a first right of refusal. So if you are selling your property and I'm an affordable housing developer and your property is COPA, what we're calling COPA eligible, so eligible in the program, You put in a notice, and I and 24 other organizations get these notifications, and I say, oh, that's in my area. We have a lot of programs there. We're really invested. We run a lot of other programs. We've got a child care center, a senior center, This makes sense for us to preserve this property for affordable housing. I put in an offer. You say like, hey, somebody wants to buy my building for $3 million. I say, okay, I got $3 million on like loan or whatever. And if you say, well, I actually have another offer, I have an opportunity to refuse. So I can match that one again. So we're just creating essentially a window in which certain entities that are for our communities can compete. Because it is very hard. I'm sure all of you know, it's extremely hard to buy property or a home, an apartment, a condo, or let alone a building. You need to have cash, you need to move fast. You are competing with multinational interests and companies and people who are just literally have cash on hand to put down an offer and move. It's very, very challenging. And so we're not even giving you as an individual an opportunity to compete in this kind of market. We're giving local organizations that know how to do housing and know how to do affordable housing an opportunity to compete and take some of that stuff off the market and hold it into permanent affordability. We had a supermajority until yesterday when somebody came off the bill because we are actually in the process of negotiating this legislation. It's the only thing I want to pass this year for the rest of the year. And the real estate industry is freaking out and going really, really hard to get people off our legislation, but we're hoping to regain our 34th sponsor so we can have a supermajority, which just means that if the mayor vetoes it, we have enough people to override that veto. So it's a good piece of legislation. It's about preserving the chance to keep that property and make it affordable in an environment that is almost impossible for everyday people to have that opportunity.
And Nathan, turning to a piece of legislation you're associated with that people also freak out about. So this idea of taxing the rich. I know you've worked with DSA on their development. So how do we respond to people when they say that if you tax the rich, they're gonna leave New York, we're gonna lose our tax base, like there's gonna be capital flight, capital strike, and it's all gonna fall apart?
So I'm happy to say that the Fiscal Policy Institute has worked on this a lot because people always talk about it. And what we've found empirically is that the top 1% of New Yorkers, which statewide is people who make over like $800,000 or so, they really move less than any other income group, which is not surprising. They're rich, so why would they move unless they really wanted to? But that's actually what the migration data from the Census Bureau show. We can see other things too, like when they do move, often they move to other states that are considered high-tax states, like New Jersey, Connecticut, and California. Again, pretty consistent. I mean, we've got lawyers here. Everybody knows that you have high-end professionals who often end up moving to the suburban areas of New Jersey or Connecticut to get a bigger house. And then the third big finding of our research is that we can look at past tax increases. So the state actually, coming off the last, this campaign I supported in 2020 and 2021, the state actually raised its top income tax rates on people who make over $1 million a year. And before that, there was essentially a tax increase in 2017, not under the state rules, but the federal tax law limited the deduction for state and local income taxes. So that's highly valuable if you're a high income taxpayer because if you make $1 million a year and you live in New York City, you pay about $100,000 a year in state and local income taxes. And so you used to be able to deduct all that from your federal taxes. And then you couldn't anymore under Trump. And so we looked at those two past tax increases to see if there was a change, any change in these migration patterns. And there's basically none. So all the evidence that we've seen shows that this population really doesn't move that much, which is not hugely surprising, except that this is the big debate in state tax policy. It's like you hear in all the business press and all the TV news shows. And so we've sort of socialized those findings. We've redone the study every year and had consistent results. And so I'd say we've had people are going to keep saying it, but we've had moderate success actually in really pushing out that research. A few other things that are kind of interesting are that there was like a lot of concern about this during the pandemic because a lot of people moved, but the first wave of movers were the highest earners, just because those are the people for whom it's easiest to move quickly, and often who professionally were in jobs that adapted to remote work environments very quickly. So in New York City alone, I remember the numbers pretty closely. So I think we had like 33,000 taxpayers, and a taxpayer is like a household, like a tax unit in New York City, making over $1 million a year before the pandemic. And then that dropped by a few thousand households that moved in that super top earning population. But it completely rebounded in the next few years. It went up to, I think now we're up to like 35,000 millionaire households. So partly it's interesting for tax reasons because they all pay a lot of taxes, and so it's good for the city's budget. But mostly it's actually kind of interesting economically because you'd say like, okay, where did they come from? You don't really have a lot of super high earners who move into the city. What you have is like this sort of hyperactive urban economy that basically produces new millionaires. It's like, oh, people might, if you think about, so I've always been on the left for a long time, but I'm happy to have had a background as a commercial tax lawyer, just sort of see how things work on that end. So if you think about it at a firm level, people who are like in these kind of high value industries, they're working in law firms and consulting firms, maybe they're like a real estate developer, and they're a partner in a real estate firm, and eventually they make it. So you have all these people who are sort of in these like up and coming businesses who eventually get promoted, or a partner moves away and they get promoted to partner. And so this like really high value economy in the city, it creates new millionaires. And so it's not just that they don't move that much, it's that like the value of having that kind of energetic local economy, even if we find the inequality that results pretty distasteful, is that it does keep on producing rich people. And it's really hard to defeat that dynamic. I mean, we love to look at the like competitiveness indexes from like anti-tax organizations that are always like, oh, what's the best state for business? Well, apparently two of the best states for business are North and South Dakota. Who knew? New York, apparently terrible place for business. This just has nothing to do with where businesses are actually located or where people make money. So it's like that nexus that, as long as that holds, should give us a lot of confidence that we're going to continue to have this really robust high-end tax base that continues to fund city services.
Okay, so I'm going to give you guys an opportunity to ask questions in here in just a moment. But just to sort of close this out, it's hard to constantly be like, oh, it's exciting, but also the doom of authoritarianism, but that is exactly what I'm going to end with. So I think that we've seen some increased ICE activity already. I think we see a lot more sort of like forms of authoritarianism sort of on the horizon, and particularly there have been a lot of threats that Trump has made specifically about sort of like this new administration and the targeting of New York. North Carolina has been targeted, my home state, in the last few days. And it just seems like it's coming, right? And so how do you all think about the future? How do we continue to have hope in this place? And also what can we do to try to resist sort of what's coming down the pipe?
You have anything from a tax point of view?
So there's something that I actually, I don't know if it's silver line. There's something I really like about this, which is, so I'd highly recommend a book called The Power to Destroy, which is a history of the anti-tax movement by a tax law professor named Michael Gratz. He's pretty old. I think he has been in a number of like past presidential administrations from before I was born. But it's a really, really good political and policy history of the anti-tax movement. And this is something that kind of starts in the Reagan years and then really accelerates in the 90s with people like Newt Gingrich. The Republicans used to be like a balanced budget sort of austerity party in that sense, but not an anti-tax party because you would have to raise taxes in order to balance the budget. And then the Republican Party went in really big for like big deficit finance tax cuts for the rich and for business. And And they made taxes, I think, really toxic, not just on the right, but also for Democrats. I won't say on the left, but for the Democratic Party. And so you don't really see and I think this is what we saw in the last federal budget debate, is you don't really see Democrats being willing to own taxing to spend, right? Nobody wants to be called a tax and spend liberal. But as I said before, you have these big programs, they cost money, you have to tax to pay for them. The only way you can really defend the integrity of keeping, it's like 50 to 60% of countries on Medicaid and Medicare. You know, there are a lot of people who are on publicly sponsored health insurance. The only way to really defend the integrity of Social Security is to own the fact that you have to tax to pay for stuff. So there's this weird little upshot of this moment, which is that this dilemma has been pushed onto the states. It's been pushed onto the states by Trump, by the federal funding cuts under Trump, by Trump's attempts to withhold funding, by his attempt to slash the federal workforce and the Department of Education. And so it's just really highlighted that real policy dilemma. And so I think it's put us in a position where if you believe in those things, you can say now, from a state and local perspective, we can just own it and say, yeah, we're gonna do it. That's one way of fighting back. We can pay for it, especially in a state like New York, which has a big economy. And you can no longer kind of kick the can and pretend like there's no debate there and we'll just let the feds handle it and not worry about the money issues. Obviously, there's a lot of bad stuff happening, but I sort of like that now we can be straightforward about like owning the need to do real stuff that costs money.
Yeah, I think, I'm working on my optimism constantly, but I think that, yes, it's a moment where the city and state needs to work together and they're gonna be forced to work together and make priority decisions. And I think, we've, as New York City, have chosen our fighter, and now next year we're gonna choose our state fighter, and hopefully there's some leverage there to force everybody's feet to the fire, to really deliver for New Yorkers by and large, and also to protect basic things that we need. I think that we have good people in place in a lot of positions of power, and I think we should take stock of that. I think with Eric, we had a situation where his corrupt behavior compromised our city, and the people that he put around him put him in a compromising position as well. And the level of scrutiny, investigations, resignations, FBI raids, I don't know, it wasn't that long ago, but it was happening all the time, right? And so like a crisis of faith and trust in our local government was a really big issue. And then on top of that, as the Trump administration started to make good on threats of violence in our city, we had someone who wouldn't even articulate that it was wrong, and wouldn't even tell our educators, like, you have an obligation to protect our families and our students in school, and these are the things that you need to enforce. You need to enforce our sanctuary city laws. We didn't even have the executive, the leader of our city, willing to say those words publicly, and that was disgraceful and disgusting. And so at this point, what we have our kind of like our fighters in place now who are very clearly and proactively saying, like, we will fight back, we are not going to accept this. We've had elected officials, people in power, I'm just speaking from the position that I'm in, of like the people that I deal with all the time, who are literally challenging the powers down at 26 Federal Plaza, who are demanding transparency and access to these places of detention, who are trying to put legislation, my Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez, putting legislation to unmask ICE. We've been playing with the jurisdictional power we have to look at what does it mean when masked, unidentified people are in the process of kidnapping someone, that maybe 4 years ago, if that was happening, you would be like, literally, you're watching someone being stolen from you. And what is the clarity there when federal law enforcement is doing a crime in front of local law enforcement, and can we push the boundaries on that? And so all the legal minds in here, like that is an active challenge we're working on right now in the city council about how do we play with that. There is, I think we have the ground right now in terms of the council and the incoming administration to really collaborate and make a budget that is good and that protects people. It's not going to be perfect, it's because it's an ongoing process. But I think more importantly, everybody who participated in the electoral process over the last 6 months, 9 months, like, you all need to continue to be a part of that. You all need to be a part of holding everybody accountable to pushing an agenda. Like, it's not over. Like, in order to, to achieve and realize the things that we all just voted for, like, we have to go yell in Albany, and people are gonna have to yell in DC, and people are gonna have to yell at City Hall, and like really push on that. And it's a constant requirement. It's going to be constant labor, and it's going to be a part of all of us to be vigilant on that. It's going to be, on all of us to organize in our communities. I mean, we just did a training actually with LJ here over the weekend, a community defense training, like practicing scenarios of like people being pulled out of cars. Like, you got to get up and get a part of something. In whatever role you can, because this is part of managing the expectation of this huge win that we just got, is that it is not a single person that can deliver it. And it's really going to have to be like all hands on deck, everybody 10 toes down. And so you have to figure out where you are in that. That's giving me hope. I love seeing people come together and figure out how to learn together, like how we're gonna defend our communities, learning what their rights are. People like saying like, no, we're gonna take this like super lefty guy and put him in charge of our city. Like, that's a huge, powerful act and statement that we've all just done together. And so I'm feeling hopeful, and I hope that you all are too, because I think there is a real opportunity here.
I just have to add something to that. That's it's not really about the nasty federal stuff that's going on, but Eric Adams was a business community pick, right? And then, I mean, huge corruption issues, the furthest thing from a good governance candidate. Andrew Cuomo's not a good governance guy, quite famously. Zohran Mamdani, whatever you think of his politics, he's made it very clear that he wants the city to run well. And I just think it is interesting that really New York City's only chance, in a number of years, at having a mayor who wants the city to work well was from a real outsider, left insurgent candidate who upset everybody's expectations. And that the sort of, as it were, interests of capital, for whatever reason, I mean, analyzing it it's so weird, it's almost interesting, but they're just not able to find people who want stuff to work.